Hello, my friends, and hello, my fellow Americans. This is Will. Normally, when I record my videos, it's just me and a text editor or a web browser, maybe writing some code or doing a Will Radio episode, whatever it is. This time, I thought I should have the camera on. So, if you don't know me, I'm Will Bird. I am a computer scientist in academia. I work on artificial intelligence, programming languages, and applying those technologies to medicine. What I'm talking about right now represents my personal views as a concerned citizen and do not reflect the official policies of any of the organizations I'm associated with. This is just me exercising my First Amendment rights to free speech. I'm very concerned right now about what's going on in the United States. In particular, that we're in a situation where the executive branch of our government is dismantling universities, dismantling checks and balances, defunding parts of the government that are critical, and in every other way, undermining the institutions that our society, our free society, is dependent upon. Most recently, the administration has claimed that it has the power under an archaic law to deport people, supposedly in the beginning, illegal immigrants who were members of violent gangs, which were called terrorists or whatever, in the words of the administration. Even though we are not at war with any country and there is no evidence of any sort of organized invasion or collaboration between gangs like MS-13 and the governments of the countries the administration has claimed are endangering our country. That's not to say that there aren't gangs like MS-13. There are, and they are violent, and they do cause real crime. However, that is different than having terrorists that are interacting with or under the control of other countries. There's no evidence that the government has presented that that is true. And in fact, the government's own intelligence agencies have said this not the case. More recently, the president has said that not only does he have the power to take someone who's an illegal alien who is part of a gang controlled by a foreign country and is therefore a terrorist and put them on a military plane and send them to a prison for terrorists in El Salvador, which apparently the president is paying for that prison. But the president wants to send what he calls homegrowns, or people who are U.S. citizens born in the United States, to such prisons. And furthermore, he has told the president of El Salvador, all of this is on camera, all of this was filmed in the Oval Office of the White House. He told that president to build more, or he would need to build more of these prisons. The judiciary system of our government, one of the three branches of the federal government, which is not subservient to the executive branch, has repeatedly ruled against the administration when it comes to different actions. The administration has misrepresented the court results. There was one result, which was a 9-0 result against the government, sending the case back to the lower court. And in that case, 3 Supreme Court justices appointed by the current president voted in that 9-0 decision against the administration. The president has downplayed or misrepresented these results and has also indicated on social media that it is optional for him to accept the results of the lower courts, and that as long as he's saving the country, no laws are violated. So until now, he said he, more or less, said he respects the Supreme Court. The cases are getting to the point now where we will see a very clear decision from the Supreme Court about whether or not it is constitutional to apply this archaic wartime or emergency time law to the export of people, especially given that the administration has said this today, actually. The president said that he's not going to give trials to all these people who are being deported, because that would take, as he said, 200 years. So therefore, it's just not going to happen. Even though the judicial system has been very clear that it'd be unconstitutional to expel people without due process. The administration has argued that they have provided due process, which in some cases apparently is giving documents in English with legal jargon to people who may or may not have good reading understanding of English, and expecting those people to be able to clearly express under lots of pressure in a short period of time that they want to exercise their habeas rights. And Supreme Court, I'm sure, is going to say that that is not sufficient due process. It's not clear what's going to happen when the courts almost certainly rule that it's unconstitutional to send people to foreign prisons from the United States without due process, because the judicial branch does not have a way to enforce their rulings outside of things like the U.S. Marshal Service, which my understanding is under both the judicial branch and the executive branch. There are some caveats there. But in any case, we are getting close to the point where we may see the executive branch of the federal government openly defy a Supreme Court decision. In that case, it's not clear what's going to happen. Given that this is about expelling people, potentially U.S. citizens, without trials and without due process to foreign prisons run by self-proclaimed dictators, this is the biggest emergency in terms of the government in my lifetime. That doesn't even take into account the defunding, the removal of grants, the firing of experts, replacing those experts with people who don't have expertise but are loyal to the administration, and on and on and on, and all the attempts to try to undermine the institutions that make our democracy. Fortunately, the current polls that I've read say something like 83% of Americans want the president to abide by a Supreme Court decision, even if it goes against the president. I think that high number may be one reason why we haven't seen open defiance yet, although the administration seems to be very close to that. It's going to get very interesting if it actually happens where there is open defiance on the part of the executive branch with respect to a Supreme Court decision. One decision recently was 7-2, another was 9-0, that sort of thing. What I would hope that would happen is that we would see a 9-0 decision from the Supreme Court that was very, very clear as to what would be considered violation or not. We might see the Supreme Court attempt to enforce their decision if they think that the administration is in contempt. There already is contempt proceedings. So there are contempt proceedings going on, or there were. They may have been canceled now. This changes so much, every day, that it's hard for me to keep up with it. Okay, but we're getting to this point where it's not clear what's going to happen, and my understanding is there has not been this level of face-off between the executive and the judiciary before. This is a known issue with the Constitution that with our system of checks and balances, it works if the different branches of the government actually do their jobs individually. So that means we have to have a working Congress that will stand up for their powers. We need to have a working judiciary, and we need to have a working executive, and they are supposed to act as balances for each other and checks for each other. It's not supposed to be a smooth process. It's not expected that the president can just say whatever he or she wants, and then the legislature just gives it to them, or the judiciary just gives it to them. This has been seen for a long time as a potential danger, even from the very earliest parts of our republic. I want to go on record to say that I support the checks and balances. I support the restriction of the different parts of government in the Constitution. The fact that the executive branch is co-equal to the judicial branch and to the legislative branch. That is critical. Those checks and balances are critical. It is critical that the executive branch respect the authority of the judicial branch, even when, and especially when, the judicial branch disagrees and says that the executive branch can't do something. That's the entire point. I'm also wanting to go on record to say that I think due process is extremely important. I think due process and freedom of speech have been under pressure for a long time, and not just from the right, from the left as well, in different contexts. As always, these ideas are always, and rights are always under pressure. There's no time where freedom of speech is not under pressure, and there's no time where due process isn't under pressure, because the whole point of those rights is to protect people who are saying things, or maybe who have done things that someone else finds, revolting or abhorrent, and also to protect people who may very well have committed crimes, right? So, United States, if you are arrested for a crime, you get to have representation. You get to have legal counsel. If you can't afford it, it's provided for you. You get to have your day in court. You get to have things like trial by jury. Okay? That is a magnificent thing. That is what separates the United States and the idea of the United States from other countries. It may be that most, or even if all, of the people who've been sent out of the country actually were here illegally. It may be that some, or even all, of those people were involved in gangs. I don't know. What is clear at this point is neither does the government. And the government has made mistakes in this process. They say, oh, well, don't worry about it. But the government has admitted in court that they have made mistakes. The entire reason we have due process, the entire reason we have things like trials and discovery and legal representation and pro bono, legal structures and all these things, is because everyone is supposed to have those protections. The government can get it wrong. Anyone can get it wrong. The systems are fallible. The people are fallible. Technology is fallible. Because, we have DNA evidence, right, that shows that the person did it. It's like, yeah, there's a long history of the DNA evidence not being right for a variety of reasons, including the labs making up information. So that's why, and we're already seeing this happen. We've already seen that, according to, I think, the New York Times, it looks like maybe 11 of the people who were sent to El Salvador that we know of may have been sent there in error. Now, it may be that after a trial, after due process, that the judicial branch of our government still makes a decision that these people should be expelled from the country, deported from the country, whatever it is. Even if that were the case, I don't know why we would be sending them to a prison in El Salvador. And I certainly don't know why we'd be sending Americans who were born in the country, who are citizens, why we would be sending those people outside of the United States to a foreign prison. And I certainly don't understand why we would do that without giving them a trial, and how this could be seen as something just in any way. And I think that the American people, even though we're right now very divided, I think there is still, in almost all of us, a very strong sense of fairness. And you can see when Americans see something that they think is really unfair and unjust, how they react to that. We saw that with the Black Lives Matter protests, for example. Okay. What we're seeing now, and we're starting to see videos and hear stories, and more stories are going to come out. And at some point, if it hasn't already happened, there's going to be a very good chance that someone who was born in the United States, who's a full citizen and born a citizen, will be deported to one of these foreign prisons. Unless it's stopped. The judicial system is working to stop that and to come up with a system where we can protect our borders, where we don't have people who are here illegally, who are committing crimes and who are part of gangs. Sure, that is a thing. But at the same time, that we're not doing it in such a haphazard way where we're trying to remove people, that there's no due process. And furthermore, we could already see that people who are supporters of the current administration are happy to say things like, well, the judges who are blocking the president, they should be sent to the prison. Or the Supreme Court should be dissolved. Things like that. Those are things that happen in dictatorships, not democracies. Those are unconstitutional and illegal. Without any doubt, those are unconstitutional. The Constitution of the United States provides for a judicial branch that is co-equal to executive and to legislative branches. Any attempt to undermine or dissolve or ignore the Supreme Court would clearly be unconstitutional. And it's important that every American know that. And in particular, I think it's important that people stand up for the rule of law, the Constitution, for the checks and balances, for due process, and for free speech, and for our institutions that are worth preserving. And that includes the universities, and that includes speech by students and faculty at universities that isn't popular. All of these things are critical, and they're all under direct threat right this second. I ask that anyone who feels like I do also makes it clear that they stand for checks and balances and free speech and due process, and that they object to the path that we're going down, and they will do what they can to preserve the institutions and the Constitution of the United States. I think it's very important. And I think it's also important that we talk to the people we know, the people in our lives, about this. There are a lot of people in the country who see immigrants who came in under the previous administration especially as dangerous, as a risk to the country, and a number of people are very much in favor of these deportations and seem to be in favor of doing it in such a way that doesn't have due process, and maybe also for native-born American citizens. There's a case in the court system now about whether or not people are citizens when they're born in the United States. Okay, so these very basic things that we've taken for granted for a very long time, certainly during my lifetime, are under very serious attack. The greatest attack that I have seen in my life. Arguably the greatest attack since the creation of this country, or at least since the Civil War. So I think it's very important that we understand what we're dealing with, that we educate ourselves as to the plans of what the people are who are trying to do this, that we push back and stand up and support our institutions and support the rule of law and support checks and balances and due process and trials, and oppose sending people without due process to foreign prisons, and look very closely as to why we are paying a dictator millions of dollars to build prisons, which sounds like the ask from the current president. We need to stop this. Congress needs to step up. One of the most alarming things came out recently is that a senator from Alaska said during a town hall that she and the other people in Congress are afraid, or at least the Republicans were afraid. They were afraid of retaliation. And I think at this point, that could also mean physical retaliation. So we have a non-functional Congress. For the Democrat side, some of the Democratic senators and independent senators and congressmen and women have been somewhat active, but in general, I don't think they've been nearly active enough. I think they need to get as active as possible right now. I applaud the efforts of the judiciary, who are dealing with an onslaught of cases. And I am heartened to see that a number of those cases are now coming from organizations that are trying to support the Constitution and checks and balances and free speech and due process. That we're seeing Harvard's lawsuits, ACLU lawsuits, among many others, and there will be more. And we need to, as a civil society, And as American citizens, I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I am an independent, and I see myself as an American citizen, not as a Democrat or a Republican. There's a reason I didn't join either party. We need to be as energetic and also we need to have what was it contagious? It's courage. Okay. We need to have courage. Courage is contagious, right? We need to have courage. If the United States of America, after 250 years of trying to figure this out, and with their checks and balances and our strong institutions and the greatest economy in the history of the world, the greatest educational infrastructure and research infrastructure and institutions in the history of the world, if we can't figure this out, then what hope is there for other countries? We need to do this, and we need to stand up. So I'm asking each of you to be courageous. I know that not everyone is going to be able to do or will be in a position or will be safe or comfortable for speaking out publicly. If you are in a position to do that, I ask that you do. You do speak out and you say what you stand for. I ask that you talk to people, at least the people who are close to you, the people that you feel like you can have an honest conversation with. And I think we have to do some explaining and some talking and some listening, all of those, to people who feel differently than we do, and try to come to agreements when possible, with the understanding that that's going to be hard because right now people are getting different sets of facts. That's a big part of this. People are watching totally different media and they're getting entirely different stories. So one thing I would ask you to do, if you're not already, is to subscribe to one or hopefully more than one newspaper that does investigative reporting. Now, the fact that our newspapers are, for the most part, controlled by billionaires, that's a set of problems as well. However, if you do a little research into the sorts of newspapers or other news sources, actually things like the late night stand-up routines have a lot of useful perspective as well, along with humor, which I think humor is very important. Humor and courage also come together. Reading books, learning how institutions fail and how democracies fail and how they survive, learning what can be done when the rule of law is on its way towards is wobbly, let's say, okay? When the checks and balances are out of whack. You could read a book like The Power Broker. I don't know, it might take a little while, okay? Read something shorter to begin with. But Robert Caro, for example, has made a career out of studying accumulation of power, how people accumulate power, and then how they use power. That's basically what we're seeing here in a different context, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. The techniques could be different, but there are a lot of similarities. How have these attempts to accumulate power in terms of overreach of the power that's granted, how have they been successful and how have they failed, especially when people are standing up? What sort of barriers are there in terms of unbridled accumulation of power? Part of it is just standing up and saying, no, that's not going to happen. Part of it might be filing a lawsuit or a protest, going to a protest, or making a website or making a video or talking to people, or one of many, many different things that could happen. Reading a book, planning something, helping someone out. There's a zillion ways. And one thing in my understanding is that's come up is that in the cases that have been successful, where people have preserved their institutions and their liberties, it's required inventing new approaches, fortunately, a lot of us are sort of geeks and are very creative with these sorts of things. It's going to require our creativity, all of it. Some of us are technologists and we know how to build things. One of the concerning aspects right now is that the biggest companies in the world, some of the richest people in the world, seem to be deeply connected to the administration. If you looked at the Easter egg event at the White House, you see that there were logos for Amazon and Meta. I don't remember. I think Apple might also have sponsored that. Obviously, there are other billionaires who've been deeply involved in various ways, maybe even more than you know. And so the people who make our technology, much of it, the people who own the media companies, the people who own newspapers, people who own YouTube. Oh, YouTube also was for the Easter egg, right? So here I am making a video for YouTube. This is why things like free software, like from the Free Software Foundation, why that's important. They've been talking about that for decades, how this is actually free as in, not as free as in beer, but free as in freedom. It took me a long time to realize, oh yeah, the Free Software Foundation isn't really about software. It's about freedom and liberty, about everything that comes with that. It's actually a whole set of ideas. So I think we're going to have to make sure that our society and the people that we're interacting with or that we care for have access to very high quality software and technology that isn't going to be listening to them or tracking them or any of the other things that could be happening with the current uses of technology. If I'm reading a book on my laptop with Apple Books, what information is sent to Apple? I don't know. Right? So I think we have to think deeply and fractally. We have to figure out to the extent we can and very, very quickly what we think is going on exactly. And as many of us as we can stand up Now, I think right now we're in a situation where it's not clear if it'd be safe for someone who's not an American citizen to speak up. Right? That's one of the scary things about this right now. I think we'll very clearly get some clarification from the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to end up blocking a number of these things as unconstitutional. That's almost certain to happen. I think we're going to see that the courts will protect our institutions in many ways. But I think we're going to have to protect the judiciary and make sure that the federal government and every other local government, state government, whatever, make sure that they respect the decisions of the judiciary. That is one of the key checks and balances. That is not optional. And one of the modus operandi that you see is the haha only serious type thing, where someone in the administration or a supporter of the administration will say something that sounds totally ludicrous, such as running for a third term, which is unconstitutional, or invading Greenland, or making Canada a 51st state, or taking over the Panama Canal, on and on and on, which would have been considered just completely insane not very long ago. But we need to call out things that are completely insane as being completely insane and say that we oppose that. We oppose it, and we're not going to support it, and we're not going to let it happen. We will do what we can to make sure that those things don't happen and to support the Constitution in every way possible. And we should expect and demand that our representatives in Congress and locally stand up, and that they use their independence as a check and a balance against the other branches of the government. Now, at this point, I'm afraid they'll be used against the judiciary in service of the executive. The point is, these are co-equal branches, and so the legislature has to serve as a check to the executive branch, and right now that's not happening to an extent I've never seen. In fact, I've never even heard of this happening to this extent. Maybe it happened with World War II with FDR or something. I don't know, but it's been a long time. Okay, it's been a minute. Well, there's a lot more I could say. All right, but that's enough for right now. Everything changes so much every day. Everything is an emergency. It's all happening at once. That's part of this plan, is to try to overwhelm people, overwhelm the courts, overwhelm the institutions. This has been explicitly said. You can find videos talking about this. So that is part of the plan, and to demoralize people, to make it seem like it's inevitable that things are going away, the institutions are going to collapse. It's only inevitable if people don't stand up. When people stand up, you can see that, oh, okay, actually it turns out that things don't move as fast as the administration would like, right? But it requires us to have courage and to stand up. This is time to stand up. Okay, well, that was me speaking as a private citizen citizen of the United States, born in the United States, who is deeply concerned about the country. None of these thoughts represent the official policies of any organization I am connected with. Okay. And good for Harvard, by the way. Good for Harvard for standing up and keep standing up. Very important. Okay. Thank you all. Have a good night. Bye-bye.